Protesters across France gathered for the 9th general strike against the government's pension reform to push back the age of retirement.
EU leaders meet in Brussels for a summit where the economy in Ukraine are high on the agenda.
The Israeli government's controversial bill sparks fresh waves of protests. Demonstrators claim the new law brings the country's judicial system and democracy into disrepute.
As dawn breaks over France, protesters gather for the 9th general strike against the government's pension reform. The roadblocks began just hours after President Emmanuel Macron said that he was ready to accept the unpopularity of his project, which he hopes to implement by the end of the year regardless. The most controversial point, pushing back the minimum retirement age from 62 to 64 years. Amongst the protests, left-wing Jean-Luc Mélenchon has defended the right to strike.
L'état de droit conditionnel n'existe pas. Le seul état de droit, c'est celui des droits constitutionnels à la liberté d'expression, liberté de manifestation, liberté de formuler son opposition quand on s'oppose à tout moment dans les formes qui sont celles de la démocratie sociale et politique pacifique qui est la nôtre.
The new day of mobilization in France once again brought chaos to transport, with a reduction in services and blockades, like this one in Paris at the Gare de Lyon, one of the capital's main train stations.
EU leaders gather in Brussels for a two-day summit that will focus on the economy and the response to the war in Ukraine. The 27 heads of state and government are expected to give the green light to a €2 billion package of military aid to Ukraine and also to the collective buying of weapons for the embattled country.
Je pense que c'est un bon accord dans le sens où on s'engage à acheter ensemble. Ça, c'est une bonne chose. Ça nous aiderait à dépenser moins d'argent. Mais en effet, c'est une première étape. La deuxième étape ne doit pas être uniquement d'acheter ensemble, mais de produire ensemble.
A new industrial strategy for the EU aimed at developing green technologies is also on the agenda. But like most leaders' summits, controversy is never far away. France wants to somehow squeeze nuclear into the clean energy mix.
Es ist nicht schnell und es ist nicht günstig und es ist auch nicht klimafreundlich. Ne, ist es nicht. Und das sage ich schon Jahre und es gibt nichts Neues. Ich finde, jeder kann seinen Energiemix machen, wie er Lust hat, aber mit europäischen Fahren drauf wäre es ein Schwindel.
Another controversial topic not officially on the agenda but sneaking its way onto it is the future ban on combustion engine cars that Germany and Italy are blocking, among others. They want an exemption respectively for so-called e-fuels and biofuels.
Fermi restando gli obiettivi della transizione che condividiamo, noi non riteniamo che l'Unione debba occuparsi anche di stabilire quali siano le tecnologie con le quali arrivare a quegli obiettivi.
There is one guest of honour though, UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres, who spoke with leaders before lunch, raising the urgent problem of famine in many countries throughout the world.
Russian forces conducted a limited drone and missile strike campaign in Ukraine over the past few days, indicated that they continue struggling with precision missile shortages. Russian forces conducted more intensive and wider-ranging strikes during their autumn 2022 campaign, suggesting that Russian forces may now be rationing their use of high-precision munitions for these strike campaigns, or may simply lack the necessary munitions to sustain strike campaigns at their earlier pace and intensity. Now, the US-based Institute for the Study of War says the tempo of Russian operations around Bakhmut, a key objective for Moscow, which sees the town as a stepping stone towards completing its conquest of the eastern Donbas region, appears to be slowing amid Western reports that Russian forces may be attempting to launch offensives in other directions. British military intelligence believes Russia's assault on the town could be running out of steam. The UK Ministry of Defense assessed that Russian forces may be losing momentum in the Bakhmut area because the Russian Ministry of Defense relocating units to other directions. Now, Russian forces are currently increasing the tempo of the offensive operations around Avdiivka, aiming to encircle the settlement from the north and from the south. And it is possible that Russian forces are doing so at the expense of their operations around Bakhmut and the stalled offensive around Vuhledar. The Institute for the Study of War says Russian forces may choose to launch or intensify offensive operations in new directions, but these operations would likely produce few tangible results as the overall Russian spring offensive continues to near its culmination.
Israeli MPs have passed a law that shields Benjamin Netanyahu from the possibility of having to leave office while on trial for corruption. In a heated all-night session, the Israeli parliament passed by a 61-47 vote a regulation that prevents the Supreme Court from forcing a prime minister to take a leave of absence or force them to resign over a conflict of interest. The law is part of the government's controversial judicial reform that has provoked massive protests from citizens who see judicial independence at risk.
I'm here because I'm worried for our democracy. I'm deeply concerned what is happening in our country with the judicial reform, so-called reform, which is actually attempting to forming a dictatorship in our country.
The reform seeks to give control to the government over the appointment of judges, including those of the Supreme Court. The protest began 3 months ago over fears the government is leading the country towards an autocracy.
Migration control has returned top of the EU's policy agenda, with leaders meeting in Brussels to discuss how to manage migrant flows following an increase in irregular arrivals. In Italy alone, arrivals have more than doubled in the first months of 2023 compared to the same period last year. After the recent shipwreck near the beach town of Steccato di Cutro in southern Italy, where more than 80 people died, Italy's Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni urged the EU to intervene on the issue. Even though Italy is seen as a transit country by migrants arriving in Europe, those who decide to stay are often stuck in limbo.
Together with the NGO Baobab Experience, we came to take a look at one of the many informal settlements that are still present in Rome. This one behind me is located next to one of Rome's main railway stations, and we have been told we cannot get in for security reasons. It was estimated there are around 100 informal settlements in the Italian capital. Migrants who were staying in one of the largest settlements were recently evicted. But who are these people? Well, according to the NGO that has been looking after them, most of these people are asylum seekers who prefer to live on the streets in the most precarious situations than stay in reception centres.
Beyond the fence, several tents can be seen in the distance. As we stand outside, a few people walk in and out of the site.
Le persone si trovano ad essere inserite in centri di accoglienza straordinaria fatiscenti, in condizioni di sovraffollamento, di condivisione di servizi igienici in diverse persone e anche di spazi di dormitori sovraffollati e in condizione di nessun tipo di servizio a supporto della persona. È meglio stare in una tenda in mezzo ad un parco perché quantomeno si è liberi e quantomeno si è in condizioni igieniche che sono dignitose.
Baobab Experience has managed to take a few migrants off the streets. We meet Hamdi. He arrived in Italy from Tunisia 2 years ago. He considers himself lucky to have escaped the worst.
Non mi devo fermare per strada, o vado, non so, perché il 90% dei ragazzi che dormono per strada poi vanno a spacciare. Perché è l'unica selezione.
While EU leaders discuss how to reform migration policies, asylum seekers in Italy are set to face tougher times under Meloni's right-wing government. Giorgia Orlandi for Euronews in Rome.
Crowds of Muslims gathered in Jerusalem's Al-Aqsa compound for evening prayers as the faithful prepare for the start of the month of Ramadan. The compound, known to Jews as the Temple Mount, is the focal point for many Muslims, especially during the holy month. But with Ramadan coming this year against a backdrop of the worst Israeli-Palestinian fighting in recent years, there are concerns of intensified violence during the holy month. And the UN has called on all leaders to refrain from provocative actions at this sensitive time. for most families, it's a time of celebration. In the West Bank city of Ramallah, thousands cheered the lighting of a giant lantern as part of cultural events that mark the holy festivities. Ramadan is a month of dawn to dusk fasting, prayer and religious devotion for hundreds of millions of Muslims around the world.
Ludwig van Beethoven most likely died of liver failure. This is the conclusion to the latest DNA sequencing study seeking to reveal the cause of the musician's death. The genetic analysis could not 100% clarify how he died or why he lost his hearing, but it has revealed gastrointestinal disorders, that he was infected with hepatitis B, and the genetic predisposition to liver disease. These factors, along with his regular consumption of alcohol, likely caused his death at the age of 56.
You have the liver disease, and this seems to have developed over about the last 6 to 7 years of his life. It's first in evidence in 1821 with a 2-month attack of jaundice that then clears. It possibly reappears in the winter of 1824 to 1825 with these heavy nosebleeds that he talks about. In the spring of 1825, he describes spitting a great deal of blood from his windpipe. This is likely indicative of cirrhosis, so the further progression of his liver disease.
In addition, Beethoven's DNA held another surprise. His Y chromosome does not match that of any of the 5 living relatives who bear his last name and share a common paternal ancestor. In other words, this points to an extramarital affair somewhere along the generations on Beethoven's paternal side. While starting to lose his hearing in his late 20s, Beethoven wrote that he wished scientists discover the cause for this, a request that has not fallen on deaf ears.